All right, folks. I am really excited to have Jason Phelps in the Disciples Made Studios today. We're going to be talking about a very important topic, the highs and lows of being a disciple-making pastor. I first met Jason as a client. Actually, I first met him on social media because he posts really well. I thought, man, that guy, he's good. I hope I get to meet him someday. And then he became very interested in Disciples Made and became a client. He is at a large church, Lutheran church in Houston, Texas, called Gloria Dei. He's the disciple-making pastor there, or strategist. And since that process of him coming on as a client and us starting to coach him and whatnot, became a fast friend. So I'm excited for you to hear from him. He's very well qualified to speak on the subject of disciple-making. But his breadth of experience in other settings, like a church plant and other ministries, has also helped him relate to anyone and everyone, not just the big challenges and benefits of working in a large church. So, Jason, welcome to the Disciples Made Studio.
And Brian, it's so good to be with you today. And I tell you, we did become fast friends. It's amazing. It's amazing to think about how quickly you and I got acquainted, and kind of went from client to partners to friends. And it's awesome to be here, and it's awesome to be able to partner with you and the rest of the Disciples Made team.
Oh, you got it, man. I mean, that's our MO, right? That's what we love more than anything. I'm still a pastor, been a pastor for 30 years. And even though I'm not in a local congregation, the way I approached this whole thing, and the only way it gave me any peace to step out and do Disciples Made full time back in 2018 was, well, disciple makers are my congregation now. Those are the people I get to care for and love on and encourage and whatnot. And you were very responsive to that. Well, let's dive in a little bit. Our listeners may or may not know that the Disciples Made ministry hosts the Fully Alive community, which has its own podcast. And you've been a part of that podcast. And you're usually on the Fully Alive podcast on the other side of the interview. You're the one asking the questions. So what's it like being on the interviewed side in this experience?
A lot less stressful. So, anybody who knows me knows that I can talk. And I can talk a little too much. And so it's pretty refreshing just kind of being able to be on the receiving end of today. And a little less stressful.
Good. Well, hopefully this can be just a fun conversation and not stressful. That's one of the things it took me a long time to overcome in my own pursuit of these kind of things. Just wanted to get the production just right. I wanted to have the product just right. He said, no, get the presence just right. Well, let's kick this off. I've given you given our listeners a little bit of professional background, but I just started, basically just tapped the idea about, the job there at Gloria Dei. Tell us about your family, your hobbies, the other things that you love apart from making disciples.
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife's name's Ashley, and we'll be celebrating 11 years of marriage coming up here in this October. And I absolutely love her. She's a gift to me. She's also a partner in disciple making, and we highly value being able to be everyday missionaries together as a family and with our kids. And speaking of them, we got 3 of them, and so our oldest we're getting ready to send off to New York to college. Right? It's
a heartbreaker. I've got several friends doing that this year.
Right. And so, just spending a lot of time with my daughter Bella, because we only got really a couple weeks left before we take her out to New York. And so, but incredibly excited for her. And then I got my other 2 are 10 and 9 years old, and I got a daughter and a son. And, when I speak of like our family being kind of everyday missionaries, we've for my goodness, for the last 12 years, we've highly valued really kind of being a family that partners with Jesus on mission, and so proud of my kids because, we just moved into a new house a few years ago when we came down here to serve at Gloria Dei, and it was fascinating because my kids had already met most of the neighbors before Ashley and I, because they had it in their DNA, I guess, right? That they went around and they knocked on doors and introduced themselves to the neighbors. And we got a lot of precious older folks in our neighborhood. And so we had this neighborhood party, I don't know, for like 4th of July. And they were like, oh, you guys are Porter and Ileana's, parents and all this kind of stuff. And I just
And a
absolutely
little child
love it.
shall lead them. I'm thinking of
Right.
Psalm 8, I guess.
Right. It's absolutely incredible. And so my wife and I, we're also musicians. We are worship leaders together in church plants and congregations and stuff for the better part of a decade. And so her and I still write and record music and perform when we can. We got a band
Awesome.
called the Homesteaders, and my wife is much more talented than I am. She's got the music degree, and she was a professional actor when we started dating. And so she also is the director at a children's theater here in town, and so she still gets to be able to exercise her artistic abilities, and incredibly talented. And then she also she gets to work with the astronauts at NASA as a crew provisions engineer, and that's been an exciting
Engineer, artist. Wait a minute, my brain just broke. She
Yeah.
really straddled that? Wow.
It's she's kind of one of a kind, and she's
I'll
told me
say.
stories about how in college when she was in her acting courses and all this kind of stuff, working with her professors, is that she always found a way to kind of grind their gears because she thinks like an engineer but has the gift set of to be an actor and a singer. And I mean, it's no joke that she's already won awards with NASA and she excels at that.
Wow.
But she also had callbacks to Broadway as an actor. And so she really is, I think, one of a kind. And I'm probably a little biased, but she's an incredible
Yeah.
woman. And so, yeah.
Well, one of my favorite stories of y'all's missional activity together is you recently had a hurricane/tropical storm come
We
through
did,
your
yeah.
area, knocked out your power. You see a potential crisis with like, what do we do with all this meat in our freezer that's no longer freezing? And I think you decided to just pull the grill out, put it in the driveway, and invite
did.
people to come and cook and enjoy.
Yeah, sure did. It's natural disasters are they're a disaster. They're not good. They cause a lot of
Right.
harm. And
Yeah.
but if we can pause and ask, okay, Jesus, how can we redeem this? How can we show up to love our neighbor, to serve our neighbor, to bless our neighbor? As we're like, well, our need is that our power's out and we got food going bad in the fridge, and so how can we redeem this? And so we brought out our Blackstone griddle, brought that out in the front yard and put out a table, brought out all of our meat, and we actually our phones weren't working very well and we didn't have the numbers, and so we actually drove down the street and just kind of like hollered at our neighbors and stuff and said, hey, we're doing this in our front yard at this time, come on over and join us, bring your
So
perishable
cool.
food. And so it was great. We had probably about a handful of families just kind of pull out their lawn chairs and bring their food, and it was fantastic. And there's definitely some neighbors that I was glad that they were there, because it wasn't until that moment that really got to serve alongside them as we all kind of raked each other's yards and cleaned up all the mess of debris, and it was a great win for relationships in our neighborhood and on our street.
Fantastic. I think we could pretty much just kind of stop there and say
Right.
this is the highs of disciple making. We're talking about the highs and lows of disciple making, but right there is just such a cool story. You just kind of allowed Jesus to elevate you above the muck and the mire, and then took an obedient step, and then that opened up so many different opportunities. I just love the way he works that way.
Very much so.
All right. Well, probably most of the people listening to this are not on staff or a key volunteer at a mega church, a big old church. So that they can better relate to you, fill us in on some of the other roles that you've played as you have developed as a disciple maker over the years.
Absolutely. So I started off in youth ministry, and worship leading. And I mean, both of those two things were really kind of marked who I was as a kingdom leader, what I was passionate about. And I started full time in ministry back in 2007 in downtown Houston, doing youth ministry 6th through 12th grade. And yeah, at that time, at that congregation I was at, which was a 150-year-old congregation in downtown Houston, and we had started a new kind of worshiping community there in the gym, and so started off with youth ministry and worship, and then from there I stepped into a little bit of a co-vocational role of working at a residential treatment center for adolescents, and so I was a chaplain.
Wow.
Working with boys and girls in foster care and juvenile probation in a lockdown facility, and that's where I really learned how to pastor and shepherd people who are hurting. I also had a few months where this was also in kind of like that co-vocational season, or even tri-vocational season, whatever you want to call it.
I worked everywhere.
Right, for a few months. I worked with teenage boys in gangs in Southwest Houston. As a driver, I would transport them. I would pick them up at their home or their apartment, right? And I would drive them to the after-school program, which would help them get off probation sooner. And kid you not, I drove like a 15-passenger van, and I would have like 12 to 13 boys that were a part of Bloods, Crips, MS-13, Southwest Cholos, La Primera, all gathered together in the back of the van.
The fact that you know all of them.
I know, right?
Golly.
Did that, and then continued to be a worship leader. By this time, I had kind of left traditional youth ministry behind and focused more on worship leading and disciple making, because at that time we had gotten partnered up with another disciple-making organization that was life transformational. In that season, it was a very hard season because I was going through a divorce at that time, had been through one, and my character was a bit of a mess. And it was through disciple-making that the Lord changed my life to grow in character, to get a better grasp of my calling, to be accountable, to learn how to hear the Lord's voice. And it was in that season back in 2010 where disciple making and discipleship really, gave me a new paradigm on ministry. And from there, my next role would be in church planting for about 6 years. And so I was the director of worship arts, and my wife and I were leading missional communities and disciple making huddles simultaneously. So I was in the church planting world for about 6 years, and then stepped into teaching high school. Back to kind of a co-vocational time. I was teaching high school theology at a Christian high school, while leading worship. And coming on staff at Gloria Day has been the first time that vocationally, strictly disciple making and leadership development and starting movements and all this kind of stuff in a large prevailing model church.
Gotcha.
And so I've been doing this now for 3 years, and then also the partnership, right, with equipping churches and pastors and leaders to also start movements of disciple making with Disciples Made and coaching, and was a leadership coach as well with an organization called Stay Forth out of Colorado Springs. And so I'm almost, as I kind of give you this list of all the different vocations and roles that I've been in, it's quite a bit. So anyways, that's my context, as far as, if any of the listeners can relate to me, and it's quite a list of experiences I've had the honor and privilege of having. So
For sure. And I may have already kind of deduced the answer to this next question based upon a couple of the stories that you just shared, but what would you say are one or two of the most pivotal moments in your life that caused you to become so passionate about multiplying disciples? And I want to do making and multiplying disciples and the missional community incarnational aspect. They're all the same, but to me, they're also worthy, I think, of separating it with this question at least. What would you? Oh, I'll stop. You got the question. Top two pivotal moments.
Yeah, I did allude to it, going back to 2010, coming off that divorce, which I actually honestly led to that I needed to resign from my position, which kind of, that's what kind of led me into the co-vocational route, because I needed to pivot vocationally, because it was, when I finally came clean of like, I mean, just honest, it was moral failure. My heart was hurting, and when we talk about intimacy and influence, right? I mean, coming off a divorce and stuff, I took a blow to intimacy, and I was sad and hurting, and found that outside of Jesus. And so, I finally, confessed my sins to my brothers in ministry and stuff. We decided it was the most loving thing to do for me to resign, and so, but it was in that time where it was simultaneously is when we started our intentional disciple making journey. And my life was changed when it was not just about leading. It wasn't just about competency. It wasn't just about, doing my ministry or anything like that. It was about a small community of brothers and sisters who became spiritual family, who loved and cared for one another, that we were learning how to hear the voice of Jesus and respond in obedience, and start to ask that question. I think that Dallas Willard proposes, that who would Jesus be if he were me? And learning, developing the spiritual disciplines, right, of engaging with Jesus and having people in your life that love you enough to hold you accountable to what the Lord is speaking to you. And my character was transformed, absolutely transformed, to be the man that I needed to be to step into church planting, to be the man that I needed to be to sustain my place on the platform as a worship leader, and then also to be the man that I needed to be for Ashley, because it was also beautifully woven together that I started my disciple-making journey just in time for the Lord to get me ready to meet who would become my wife. And during that time as well, I read a book by Erwin McManus called Uprising.
Yeah.
And it hit me square between the eyes, because I wish I could remember the quote verbatim, but he said that oftentimes what church leaders experience is that their skill and their competency will give them a platform that their character can't sustain.
Yeah, so good.
And that's where I was at. And so, so that was one big moment, and was just being able to be transformed through being in an intentional disciple-making relationship. It got me passionate about it. And with that organization too, is that we were, me and my pastor at that time were given opportunities to join with this organization, which then led us to different taster events throughout the state of Texas to be able to lead these workshops with some other disciple makers that were authors and this kind of thing, and it got me just incredibly passionate about working with other church leaders and pastors, and my heart beats whenever I get to do consulting or training to help other churches and leaders get to see what happens when we're no longer just satisfied with ministering to church consumers, which is absolutely draining for me, but to actually see congregations come alive and move from consumers to kingdom contributors, which means more partners, which means more life-giving ministry, which also means more saturation of the gospel in our neighborhoods. And to me, like, life is just way more fulfilling when we get to see other regular, just ordinary Christians partnering with Jesus, seeing lives changed and transformed. And I would say the other thing too is while all of this was going on, right, I was also, worship leader, that I became really dissatisfied with pouring in all my energy and gifts and talents and planning into 1 hour a week on Sunday. Like I just, it was not fulfilling. And I couldn't reconcile that. Like everything I'm doing as a worship leader was just going to be over and done in an hour. You know, for those who know me in my denominational tribe, I kind of like, I don't know, was like a grain of sand in, in like the worship leading circle, that I always had an opinion that tended to be counter to what was being taught within the worship leaders, you
That's
know?
funny.
And so
Let me pause you for a second, Jason.
go ahead.
We're getting ahead here, and there's so many things I want to pull out of the things you just said. There's three observations that I want to make, but before that, I'm sure that there's people that are listening that are wondering. You've said that organization probably 7 times. They're probably wondering what that organization is. Are you at liberty to share?
Well, yeah, I was partnered with 3D Movements, for the better part of 10 years. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so there's 3 things that I want to pull out of this as far as the shaping of your story. One, it took, well, let me just say it just as plainly as I know how. You were on a church staff carrying out Christian ministry, but did not have a disciple-making environment that kept you on the path that you needed to stay on with Jesus and family and everything else. That's what I'm hearing. That's a big statement. That's not an indictment. I'm not saying that to indict. I'm just saying that to just bring out as clarity. It's possible for disciple makers to be very active in the work of Jesus and miss the opportunity to be a disciple of Jesus amongst others. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of observation number 1. Observation number 2 is that process was catalytic in you yearning for, longing for a different environment, which you described as pouring into one another, holding each other accountable, being all these other things. And that helped you catalytically transform. You said in character, which protects your calling, which allowed the skill set to continue to grow. And so that's kind of phase 2. So that helps me understand why disciple making is so important to you, because it was so valuable to you. Yeah. And you want others to experience that. It's the same for me. I was in the church. I was doing all the things that I thought I should be doing, and I was still making very painful and poor choices. And it wasn't until a couple of people started to really invest more heavily in me that started to grow. And so I have this huge value. Like, I would much rather, like you, spend the time investing in people and seeing real change than spending a lot of time and energy putting on an experience like a worship service, so to speak, that may or may not have that change. So then the third element that I see that was so catalytic is when you get around a group of people like 3DM who had exceptional ideas, pulling out not just Jesus' message, but his methods of how he discipled people while he was here on earth in bodily form. And that just kind of took you to a whole new level of expectation for what life could look like. Am I catching that right? Like, it started with brokenness in spite of being on a church team. That put you in a real church team that saw the growth, gave you the burden for it, and then you got language that created vision of what it could be that's captured your heart.
Absolutely. I tasted and saw and experienced something that was so good and so different and so meaningful and so transformational. And I think that's why all of us get in the ministry in the first place. But it's like once you
I think there's a lot of cistern type motivations. There was for me anyway. We won't go there. It's not the point of the podcast, but
that's a different one, right?
Yeah.
But like, it's like once you jump in the water of intentional disciple making and multiplication and movemental church's movement, I can't go back.
Yeah,
I can't go back.
Yeah.
Got
it. All right. Well, I'm excited to talk about the ups of disciple making. I'd rather just sell the good stuff. But I want us to end there. I want us to end on a positive note and have plenty of time to be honest and deal with the downs. Because if all we do is sell how we're winning or how you're winning or whatnot, it's like telling the story of King David without talking about the broken parts of his leadership and the down times, the things that were a real miss. So let's start with the downs. What would you say are the top 2 or 3 challenges for you as you seek to not only make disciples, but multiply disciples that, and I'll add this, that engage in bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, not just in the local congregation, but incarnationally where they live, work, learn, and play?
Yeah, and absolutely. Well, there is in a large prevailing model church, there is a gravitational pull that always pulls you back to the metrics that we've known and been practicing for decades, which is how many are you worshiping on Sunday? How big are the programs? Butts and bucks and all that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is this huge cultural pull, and I think too of just like, consumerism, because it's easy. It's easy for people to just show up to worship, and that's what they do. And then they go home and they're back to their lives. And so, so with the intentional disciple making, and the systems and the movements that we're starting here at Gloria Day, is that it's slow. It's slow going. And it takes, and it's hard because you have to have a lot of hard conversations to say, like, we need to stick to it. It's worth it. I know that it doesn't seem like there's much happening, but there is, because we're not going a mile wide and an inch deep, is that we're going an inch wide and a mile deep. And so discipleship goes at the speed of relationship. And so we just need to hang in there, because if we imitate the words, works, and ways and methods of Jesus, we can't go wrong. And so it's different. And so trying to navigate that tension of saying, it's worth it. We might not see it now, but it's worth it, because we're changing culture slowly but surely, because all of this goes at the speed of relationship. And meaningful relationships don't happen overnight. They happen over time. You need proximity. You need predictable patterns. And it's just slow going. And so, so that's one of the challenges.
Let me crystallize that as much as I can. I have this awkward or maybe helpful habit of trying to take this much that you just said and putting it here, so that everybody can kind of keep a hold of it. I would say that is one of the challenges would be the difference in what we define as a win.
Yeah.
Right. There's a standard definition of win in church, which is number of people and, the butts and bucks and all those things. And whether that's admitted or not, if you look at all the strategies and structures, where the budget goes, all these other things, you can see that the win has been established. And the way I like to talk about this is, if you're at a football game and you've defined, that from your goal to the 30-yard line is the win, then we've just left 70 yards of potential on the table.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I would clarify that. It's just fighting against a different and accepted and structured win that is not satisfactory. Is that fair?
That's fair. That's
Good.
fair.
All right, 2.
Yeah, I heard a great quote by another missional practitioner named Dave Rhodes, and he said, "It's not whether or not you have the heart for disciple making, but whether or not you have the stomach for it."
Dave's great. That's so good. He's just a great guy.
Because you know what? It would be absolutely easier to just do church as we've always done it. Not better, but easier. And maybe not even in the long run, but in the short term. Because obviously I think if we put in the work to transform a congregation, to move from consumers to contributors in the long run, when we're talking 10, 20, 30, 50 years out, to have a whole church full of partners in ministry who are
it's a game changer.
Right? So, but in the short term, in the day to day, yeah, maybe it's just easier not to have the hard conversations.
Yeah, I'll get to that next year.
Yeah, yeah,
I said
yeah.
that, and I heard that so many times. We did press through that, and we figured out at the church I was at, Westside, another large church here in Kansas City, we figured out how to do them both and had great momentum. Hundreds and hundreds of people that had pushed through and saw themselves more as partners. So that's some of the coaching that we do to help churches get there. But let's stick with the pains. You said you had a couple more?
Yeah, and I think too is that it, the pains of it as well is, figuring out what is the win, and I'm so thankful, just for my pastor and for our executive team, who gave me a seat at the table and who gave me a voice, and permission to be able to wrestle through, what does it look like for Gloria Day to intentionally make disciples? And very much like, your church in Kansas City, is that we're doing both assimilation and multiplication as well. And how do we, leverage both of those things to make, because what my pastor Dan, had told me is, he said, Jason, don't blow up. Please don't blow up the church, and so over the last, 3 years we've had some really meaningful but really hard conversations to really try and figure this out. And because we put in the work of having those hard conversations, and when I say the stomach for disciple making, it is being able to have those hard conversations, because over the last couple of years is that I knew that there were a few things that I needed to hold the line on, and do it in a respectful way, recognizing that God did not put me in charge here, and so how do I, because when it comes to the disciple making, right, there's a lot of unknowns. It's new, for a lot of leaders and a lot of pastors, and so how do we rethink the paradigm? Right? How do we have this paradigm shift? And so really that's with a lot of hard conversations is within a large prevailing model church, how do we steward a paradigm shift in a way that won't blow up the church, but that we can do both assimilation and multiplication, in a way that we are going to see kingdom wins. And so there was a lot of pain in that. And it was a lot of, sleepless nights, some insomnia, trying to figure out how can I best honor the culture here, but while also being called to see the changes made that I was brought here to do, because I was brought here to cultivate for a purpose, to
take us where we can't see. But yes. And just to highlight real quickly before you move on, the difficulty in this, there are a number of very smart, prominent people who think it's not possible. Just to mention a couple, Francis Chan decided that it really can't be done, and so he made some decisions where he left one to do the other. When Rob Wegner and Brian Johnson stepped out of Westside Family Church, we can't really transition this. We need to be full bore multiplication without an assimilation process. So that's how they started the Kansas City Underground. And so there's a lot of people that have said, I'm out of that process and I want to go full into it. So for you to stick in that's big. And I just want to highlight how challenging it is to create a different end zone within something that has a very structured, when I say structured, I mean it's built in. You can't get out of the financial model of, but people and butts and bucks. You can't. It will blow up. So, yeah, that's a challenge. It just gives me a little tick,
Right.
thinking of some of those challenges. So
yeah,
good.
It's
another low.
I think I don't know if it's a low, but it's a challenge. Is in the Disciples Made and Fully Alive community, right? I mean, this whole Fully Alive live, intimate. You'll hear us talk about intimacy and influence, right? And I think that for me, that when it comes to disciple making, it goes back to not just hard conversations with an executive team and trying to figure out how to best steward a paradigm shift and culture change, but it's also being willing to have challenging conversations with those that you're discipling. And that's always a challenge for me, and perhaps why it might be easier just to do programmatic church is because you're not actually contingent upon real relationships. And when there's real relationships, there's also it challenges your ability to be intimate, I think. And you have to be willing to show your flank. You have to be willing to be hurt, and willing to risk even losing relationships and this kind of thing. And so that's not necessarily a low, but it is a challenge, I think, especially for me, because I want everybody to like me. I like peace. I like peace, even if it's false peace, And so, but I think that when you're on a disciple making journey, it's, true peace involves risking conflict and risking being hurt and stuff like that. And I know for people that maybe struggle with intimacy, is that's always going to be a fear, is fear of showing your flank, which then you risk your influence in somebody's life, that if things don't go as you planned. So
yeah, I have found you have to model vulnerability before you can invite it from others.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just a long process, but you're right. I mean, if you really want to be iron on iron, he didn't say cotton on cotton, did he?
No. You had made a quote that I heard. It's like we talk about iron sharpening iron, but sometimes it's more like marshmallows bumping into each other. You had said that.
Yeah.
And here I want to share one of this, I guess, low in this challenge. I think is this idea of and what I've seen over the last few years of partnering with Disciples Made is this idea of time, and recognizing that like there's a lot of people who don't want to take the time to be discipled, and then it's another level to actually take the time to disciple others because of this perception that I don't want to take the time to invest and to make disciples. My life is so busy with work and family and boy, just going to church is too much, and I kind of see that. And so it's I wish I could say over the last few years that like everybody that I've discipled would be like, yes, I want to do what you do, Jason, and I also want to develop kingdom leaders, and I want to take the time to lead all these cohorts, and that's just not the case. And so I think, sometimes too is just is patience and prayer, and that my job isn't to coerce somebody and convince them to make disciples, but to allow Jesus to awaken that in them, and a lot of that is getting to share stories and inviting people into transformational experiences and being able to release the outcome to Jesus. So,
yeah. One of the challenges I hear from a lot of disciple makers, and this is kind of moving into more of a raw area, and I know that, as you said earlier, we want to be deeply respectful of this, but we also kind of want to open the channel so that people have permission to walk in here, because it's only when we walk in here that we can actually do this better. But in a variety of ways, one of the biggest challenges is a lack of support from the senior leadership, whether that's the senior pastor, executive team, whatever it is. My first several years at Westside, we had the absolute full support of the lead teaching pastor. And then over time, as some transitions were shifting, that changed. And that changed the impact of multiplication in that setting. And so I felt that personally. When I talk about lack of support, it could be financial support, a lack of like promotion and priority on the church calendar and the church newsletters, or just a lack of getting it, or a lack of concern. It's like, that's your job, but I really don't, I've got other things I need to do, and you don't get time with me to help these things happen. And, people need to know these folks have a lot on their plate. They have a lot of staff, perhaps, if it's in a large church, that want to prioritize the things on their agenda just as much as you want to prioritize the things on yours, and whatnot. So how have you attempted to garner the support of your senior leadership? And can you give us, starting to move toward the ups here, can you give us a couple of examples of how God has shown favor to that effort?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we, as the executive team, we put in the work.
So you're on the executive team, so you have a voice at that table.
I do.
You mentioned that early. Yep.
Yeah, and we put in work. And I was entrusted to help us to figure out what would it look like for Gloria Day to start a culture of disciple making to increase our sending capacity of everyday missionaries into Southeast Houston. And that's incredibly exciting, and that's actually baked into everybody's job description here at Gloria Day.
That helps.
Right.
That's huge.
Right. And it was honestly I knew that I could not blow up the church. So, and quite frankly, so when I had initially brought in a resource called Future Church that I led our staff through, which a lot of that we got this idea for this funnel fusion, which is also goes hand in hand with everything with Disciples Made as well. Is when we speak of funnel fusion, we a funnel in of assimilation and a funnel out of multiplication. And that resonated, and so we started to bring our staff through it, and then during that journey too is when I read about Disciples Made in the book Starfish in the Spirit, and had we gone all in with that book, it would have blown up Gloria Day. But the parts on intentional disciple making, that could be done. And so then when it came time, to pull the trigger, we decided to partner up with Disciples Made. We went through the integration training with you and Joe Klassen. And so our executive team went through that. And it was challenging because it challenged the paradigms. It challenged the wins. But then we continued to, through staff retreats, I would bring in ideas and we would grind it out and we'd have the hard conversations. We'd figure out what does this look like for our context. And we came up with a disciple making pathway, which I was told that could not be changed when I came here, but we changed it. And so now we have our own custom disciple making pathway that is both assimilation and multiplication. And I am supported now. We've got a language and we've got vision, and here's a beautiful win because I think the biggest way that my supervisors have supported me is by joining me in what we're doing. And so our senior pastor and our chief of staff and operations are co-leading Disciples Made's 9-month Leaders Made cohort. Yes. And for me, that to be able for my senior pastor and my chief of staff to say, Jason, thank you for bringing this to the table. We also want to do what you're doing. And for me, boy, that's probably the biggest support that I could have ever asked for is...
Man, big kudos.
Right?
That's not easy.
No.
Because they're busy.
They are busy. Very
you said
busy.
Time was one of the big challenges. It is, and for them to prioritize that.
Yeah, it's the biggest thumbs up, compliment, support I could have gotten is that it's not just, Jason, you do this, but we are partnering with you in this, and we're in this with you. That's
huge.
It's huge. Very thankful.
Well, we are running thin on time, but we want to end on this up stuff. So 2 or 3 other ultimate joys that you've had in making and multiplying disciples.
Oh my goodness. I now, when I look at the guys that I have discipled into kingdom leaders over the years, one of my buddies, Adrian, he was the drummer in my worship team. And now, although we're not in the same church, he now is making disciples at his church, and he's leading international missionary teams to Turkey. And seeing him thrive as a disciple maker, it just, and then, it makes me incredibly proud as like a spiritual father
Heck
to
yeah.
him. And I love that he calls me when he needs guidance and when he needs prayer, and when he needs support. Like that's the biggest compliment that I could ever give, is that
Oh, yeah.
you still value me enough to speak into your life. And then my other buddy Ian, he was my worship leader apprentice at a previous church, and we're not serving together in the same church, but he now is intentionally making disciples at his church at another congregation in Texas. And he is, joined up with Disciples Made, led a Followers Made, and
Love Ian.
couldn't be more proud. And those are just two individuals that I love deeply. That they're not just former colleagues. Is that honestly they're also my two best friends. So to go from, team members to disciples, to partners, to friends, to family, to brothers, is an incredible joy of ministry in this way of disciple making. So
I find it absolutely intriguing and confirming of my own experience that when you are asked to list the top 2 or 3 things of disciple multiplication, that you picked 2 examples of, your fruit is growing on other people's trees.
yeah,
Like, that's the most joy there is.
yep,
I now know what it's like to have physical grandchildren, but for a decade or so before, I knew what it was like to have spiritual grandchildren. When you watch the people that you've invested in, investing in others who invest in others, it's just the most gratifying, satisfying part of being a disciple maker. Thank you
absolutely.
for highlighting that. All right. So you've been, as you've alluded, recently serving Disciples Made and the Fully Alive community as a volunteer by a number of things, driving social media posts. We've started to crank out the monthly focus webinar for the community. You've recently completed the certification to become a Disciples Made coach. That took several sessions of learning and processing. What is it? And we can be pretty quick about this, but
Yeah.
what is it about this ministry that captures your heart to do this? Like, why Disciples Made?
Yeah. Honestly, you're a big part of that. Just the posture of Disciples Made, of the team. I've had the opportunity to meet the board, and just the posture of the team that is Disciples Made is absolutely life-giving, and it's healthy. And that means a lot to both my wife and I. And so that's a big part of it. And the other thing too is just the theology of disciple making that you've written about in your book Fully Alive. It makes so much sense. And I think especially in just the state of our world, I see a lot of people, even if they're not connected with Disciples Made or Fully Alive, is that John 10:10, I'm seeing it surface more and more, because Jesus' promise of a rich and satisfying life, an abundant life, a fully alive life, is what we are so desperate for, I think, right now in our world. And so just to be able to really take Scripture and to be able to connect it to John 10:10, that that God created us in His image to live fully alive, and that was stolen. And it was lost. And Jesus came to redeem it, to give us this life back, knowing that one day it will be fully restored. The language that comes with that, of intimacy, of influence, and when we settle, for the cracked cisterns that Satan leads us to, of approval and control, it makes so much sense. And then, by just simply boiling down disciple making to character times calling equals influence, and as we grow in character, our intimacy increases. And as we grow in our calling, our influence increases, and all of that. And so tying in discipleship to this fully alive life, it makes so much sense. And then I love it. And I can grasp it. And, I'm not the smartest person in the world. And I need just a concrete theology and framework and system to help me multiply disciples. And I love it. And so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. That's so encouraging. when people ask, like, what's Disciples Made? I'm like, well, we could go one of several ways. It's a deeply embedded theology that motivates it. There's core strategy. There are a list of tactics that go along to support that strategy. And there's all kinds of experiences, courses, and cohorts that you can use. And it's all together into kind of like a disciple-making ecosystem that's evolved. But of those four, and I'm glad you mentioned this, of those four, the one that drives me the most, probably the only thing that drives me in this ministry more than just simply the person and work of Jesus himself, is the theology. Yeah. When I see that and I tap into my own experience of actually being able to leave the irresistible almost cisterns to find the better way, because Jesus is more just that. Every time I hear it talked about, I think I even pumped my own chest there a minute ago. It's the center of my heart is this rich theology that this all stems from. So thank you for bringing that up. All right. You're in your early 40s, right?
Yes, I am.
Gosh, that seems like... I remember when I thought 40 was old. I eclipsed 40 a good bit ago. That means you have a good stretch of ministry left before you. So as you look to your future, what do you want to accomplish when it comes to multiplying disciples? And what are you seeing as just the next steps for your life?
Yeah. Man, I think the vision of Disciples Made grabs my heart of equipping 70,000 people to be disciple makers, helping 2 million of their friends live fully alive, and seeing that done, through Disciples Made and here at Gloria Day, just being able to help more people, to grow as kingdom contributors. And, and my heart beats for, whenever I get the opportunity to, I loved when I went to, with you to Bethany Lutheran Church in Austin, to help their team shift that paradigm. And is that I love that environment. And so I'm eager to, to help more churches and pastors and leaders, shift their paradigm into what it looks like to start movements of disciple making in their own pockets of Christendom, around the nation and around the world. And so I think, I'm really passionate about my denomination, and the Lord has given me influence within that. And so to help more Lutheran churches, partner with Disciples Made, because really the theology that we just talked about goes so well with Lutheran theology in particular, and helps stretch that as well.
And you've got a fire alarm going off in your church.
I do. I do. And I need
so you have to leave,
out.
Don't you?
I do.
All right. Well, let's end with this then. Shucks. And then I'll talk about the webinar. I love Texas. My brother's there. My parents were there. I love Luther. I'm actually going to go to Wittenberg and Erfurt and Eisenach to the Wartburg Castle where he translated the New Testament. So maybe Texas Lutherans will be the place that starts a new multiplication revolution in the church. Just maybe. Just maybe.
I think so.
I'd be all about it. I had a blast with you and joining down there at Bethany in Austin. So feel free to take off if you need to. We've got a webinar coming up. I think it's August 29th in the afternoon. You can go to disciplesmade.com/training. $39 gets you 3 people. If you have any trouble with the $39, we'll cover it. It's not a big deal. We would love for you to join us for the webinar. It's called Work Smarter, Not Harder. And we're going to unpack almost all of the strategies that we talked about today. So, Jason, please don't burn up. We need you in this thing long term. God bless you. Thanks for being on the podcast with us today.
Thanks so much, Brian.
You bet. Don't